In a quiet little neighborhood on the edge of a busy city, there lived a man who had spent most of his life protecting others. He was the chief of police in the area, a position that came with respect, admiration, and a whole lot of responsibility. People often looked up to him as someone who stood for fairness and justice. But while he was known for keeping the streets safe, what no one expected was how his own street would turn into a battleground. This man, let's call him the chief, wasn't your typical authority figure. Sure, he wore the badge proudly during work hours, but at home, he was just another dad trying to keep his family happy. His house wasn't anything fancy. It had a modest garden, a basketball hoop in the driveway for his teenage son, and curtains that matched the color scheme inside. Life seemed pretty normal until things took an unexpected turn. You see, this neighborhood had something else going on behind the scenes. There was this group called the Homeowners Association, or HOA for short. Now, if you've ever lived in a place with an HOA, you probably know they can be, well, particular about rules. These weren't small rules either. We're talking about guidelines so detailed they could make your head spin. Wanna paint your front door blue? Better check the rule book first. Thinking of parking your car on the street overnight? Nope, not allowed. Even hanging laundry outside might get you a warning letter. For years, the chief tried to stay out of the drama. After all, he had enough chaos to deal with at work, chasing criminals, solving cases, and making sure everyone stayed safe. Dealing with complaints about overgrown bushes didn't exactly fit into his daily agenda. At first, the HOA sent polite reminders about minor infractions here and there. A note slipped under the door about trimming the hedge. Another one about leaving the trash cans out too long. The chief shrugged them off, thinking it was harmless nitpicking. But then, things started escalating. One day, he got a strongly worded letter accusing him of violating noise ordinances because of a small backyard barbecue he'd hosted for his family. This was ridiculous. He remembered checking with the neighbors beforehand, and nobody complained. Still, the HOA insisted he needed permits for such gatherings. Permits for a casual weekend cookout where burgers were flipped and laughter filled the air. It felt like they were intentionally picking fights now, despite the growing tension. The chief decided to let it slide. Fighting back would only waste time and energy better spent elsewhere. Or so he thought. What happened next proved that ignoring the problem wouldn't make it go away. In fact, it made everything much worse. One evening, after a long shift at work, the chief finally sat down to relax. His wife brought him a cup of coffee, and he settled into his favorite chair by the window. The house was peaceful, the kind of calm that comes after a hectic day. Outside, the sun was setting, casting golden hues across the yard. Everything seemed fine until he noticed movement near the curb. Two men dressed in uniform stood near his driveway. They wore hats, shiny badges clipped to their belts, and carried handcuffs. From a distance, they looked like regular cops. But something about them felt off. Maybe it was the way they glanced around nervously, or how their boots scuffed against the pavement instead of walking with confidence. Whatever it was, the chief's instincts kicked in immediately. Curiosity got the better of him, and he stepped outside to see what was going on. As soon as he opened the door, the two men turned toward him. One of them cleared his throat and said, "Sir, we're responding to reports of illegal activity at this address. We'll need to come inside." Illegal activity? The chief blinked, unsure whether to laugh or be angry. He hadn't done anything remotely close to breaking the law. In fact, he was literally the person responsible for enforcing it. Something wasn't adding up. "Excuse me?" he replied, crossing his arms. "What exactly are you referring to?" The taller of the two men held up a clipboard, pointing to some papers. "We've received credible information that you're operating a business from your residence without proper authorization. you'll need to accompany us for questioning." At this point, the chief knew something was seriously wrong. First of all, he didn't run any kind of business from home. Second, these guys didn't act like real officers. Their body language screamed uncertainty, and their stories sounded rehearsed. Real cops didn't show up citing vague accusations. Without solid evidence, instead of panicking, the chief stayed calm. Years of experience taught him how to handle tense situations without losing his cool. He asked to see their identification again, studying it closely. While the badges looked convincing, the details didn't match official police credentials. This confirmed his suspicions they weren't legit. "I think you should leave," he said firmly, stepping closer. "I'm the chief of police in this town. If you don't walk away right now, I'll have actual officers here within minutes." His tone left no room for argument. The impostors exchanged nervous glances before mumbling something about needing to verify paperwork. Then, without another word, they hurried back to their car and sped off. The chief watched them disappear down the road, his mind racing with questions. Who were those men? Why did they target him? And most importantly, who sent them? Standing alone in the twilight, he realized this was far from over. Someone wanted to intimidate him, and they'd gone to extreme lengths to do it. But whoever it was had clearly underestimated who they were dealing with, because the chief wasn't just anyone. He was the guy who dedicated his life to standing up for what was right. And he wasn't about to let anyone push him around, not even fake cops. The chief stood there for a moment, watching the taillights of the car disappear into the distance. His heart was pounding, but his mind was already racing ahead. Something about this whole situation felt deeply personal. It wasn't just some random misunderstanding. It was calculated, deliberate, and designed to rattle him. Whoever had sent those fake officers knew exactly who they were dealing with, the head of law enforcement in the town. And that made it all the more unsettling. He went back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it for a second, trying to process what had just happened. His wife walked over, holding her coffee mug. "What was that all about?" she asked, concern written all over her face. "They tried to arrest me," he said flatly, still half in disbelief himself. Her eyes widened. "Arrest you? For what?" "For running a business out of the house," he replied, shaking his head. "Which, obviously, I'm not doing." She frowned. "This has something to do with the HOA, doesn't it?" It was a good guess. The HOA had been breathing down their necks for months, now sending letters, leaving notes, making complaints about every little thing. But this? Sending fake cops to harass him? That was a new level of crazy. Still, the chief couldn't ignore the possibility. He'd learned long ago that when you're investigating something, you follow the evidence, no matter where it leads. And right now, the HOA seemed like the most logical place to start. The next morning, the chief decided to take action. First, he filed an official complaint with the local police department. Even though he was the boss, he wanted to make sure everything was documented properly. He explained the situation calmly, presenting the facts as clearly as possible. His colleagues listened intently, their expressions shifting between shock and anger. One of them even muttered under his breath, "Who would dare mess with you?" While the internal investigation began, the chief turned his attention to gathering more information on his own. He started by checking the security cameras installed around the neighborhood. Most homes had them these days, and luckily, one of his neighbors had a camera pointed directly at the street outside his house. When he reviewed the footage, he spotted the car the fake officers had driven, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows. The license plate was partially visible, enough to run a check. That's when things got interesting. A quick search revealed that the car belonged to a private security firm. Not just any firm, though it was one known for providing services to corporate clients, including homeowners associations. This wasn't proof yet, but it was a strong lead. The pieces were starting to come together. Determined to get answers, the chief decided to pay a visit to the president of the HOA. She was a woman who prided herself on maintaining order in the neighborhood, or so she claimed. In reality, she ruled the HOA with an iron fist, enforcing rules that bordered on absurd. Neighbors whispered about her behind closed doors, calling her controlling and unreasonable. But no one dared challenge her openly. Until now, when the chief arrived at her house, she opened the door with a look of surprise. "Oh, what brings you here?" she asked, forcing a smile. "I think you know why I'm here," he said bluntly. Without waiting for an invitation, he stepped inside and showed her the security footage of the fake officers near his property. Then he placed a printout of the car's registration details on her dining table. "Care to explain how your security company ended up sending 2 men pretending to be cops to my house?" Her face turned pale. For a moment, she stammered, searching for words. Finally, she managed to say, I don't know anything about this. You must have the wrong person." But the chief wasn't buying it. He leaned forward, his voice steady but sharp. "Look, I'm not here to play games. I've got the evidence. If you're involved in this, it'll come out sooner or later. Your best bet is to tell me the truth now." She hesitated, then sighed heavily, sinking into a chair. After a long pause, she admitted that she had hired the security firm, but only to monitor certain residents who weren't following HOA rules. "I didn't tell them to impersonate police officers," she insisted. "That part wasn't supposed to happen." The chief raised an eyebrow. "So you admit you sent them to intimidate me?" "It wasn't intimidation," she protested. "It was motivation. You've ignored our requests for months, and frankly, we're tired of it." "Motivation?" he repeated, incredulous. "You sent fake cops to my door because I didn't trim my hedges? Do you realize how serious this is?" Her silence spoke volumes. She knew she was in trouble. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood about what had happened. Some people were outraged, while others sided with the HOA president, claiming the chief should have followed the rules like everyone else. Tension simmered beneath the surface, turning friendly waves across fences into cold stares. Meanwhile, the chief continued digging deeper. With the help of trusted colleagues, he uncovered emails exchanged between the HOA president and the security firm. These emails painted a disturbing picture. They discussed strategies to pressure the chief into compliance, including staging scenarios that would force him to back down. Impersonating police officers was just one tactic among many. As the evidence mounted, the chief realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about accountability. If someone could abuse their power like this without facing consequences, what message did that send to the rest of the community? People needed to know they were safe from harassment, whether it came from criminals or misguided authority figures. With the case building against the HOA president, the chief prepared to take legal action. He handed over all the evidence to the district attorney, confident that justice would prevail. But he also knew this wouldn't be easy. The HOA had deep pockets and connections throughout the community. They wouldn't go down without a fight. Still, the chief refused to back down. This wasn't just about winning. It was about setting an example. He wanted to show everyone, his family, his neighbors, and even his critics, that standing up for what's right isn't always convenient, but it's always worth it. Late one night, as he sat at his kitchen table reviewing documents, his teenage son walked in. "Dad," the boy said, "is all this really necessary? Can't you just let it go?" The chief looked up, meeting his son's gaze. "Sometimes," he said softly, "doing the right thing means standing your ground, even when it's hard." If I give up now, what kind of example am I setting for you? His son nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. Okay, he said. Just be careful, all right? I will, the chief promised. And with that, he returned to his work, ready to face whatever came next. The battle was heating up, and the chief knew he was stepping into uncharted territory. This wasn't just about him anymore. It had become a fight for accountability, fairness, and the kind of community people deserved to live in, but as much. As he wanted to believe that justice would prevail, he also knew how messy things could get when power, ego, and money were involved. The HOA president wasn't going down without a fight, and she had no shortage of resources or supporters willing to back her play. With the emails and security footage in hand, the chief decided to dig even deeper. He reached out to former employees of the private security firm hired by the HOA. It wasn't easy. Most of them were hesitant to talk, fearing retaliation or legal trouble. But after some coaxing and promises of anonymity, one of them finally agreed to meet. They met at a small diner on the outskirts of town, far from prying eyes. The ex-employee, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a nervous demeanor, slid into the booth across from the chief. I shouldn't be doing this, he muttered, glancing around the room. You're doing the right thing. The chief reassured him. Just tell me what you know. The man took a deep breath and began explaining how the HOA president had approached the firm months ago. At first, it seemed harmless enough. She wanted them to patrol the neighborhood and issue warnings to residents who weren't following HOA guidelines. But over time, her requests grew more extreme. She started asking for staged interventions, like sending officers to escort people out of their homes during disputes. When those tactics didn't work, she suggested impersonating real law enforcement to scare non-compliant homeowners into submission. She thought it'd make people listen. The man said, shaking his head. But we never imagined it'd blow up like this. The chief listened intently, jotting down notes. By the end of the conversation, he had enough information to paint a clear picture of what had happened and who was pulling the strings. Armed with the evidence, the chief decided it was time to bring everything into the light. He called a special meeting of the HOA, inviting all residents to attend. The room buzzed with tension as people filed in, whispering among themselves. Some came out of curiosity, others out of concern. A few showed up because they supported the HOA president and wanted to defend her. When the chief walked in, the murmurs stopped. All eyes turned to him as he stood at the front of the room, calm but resolute. He laid out the facts plainly, showing screenshots of the incriminating emails and playing snippets of audio recordings where the HOA president discussed her plans with the security firm. Every word, every detail pointed directly to her involvement. This isn't about me, he said, looking around the room. This is about all of us. If someone can abuse their power like this, none of us are safe. We deserve better than intimidation and lies. The HOA president sat stiffly in her chair, her face flushed red. When it was her turn to speak, she tried to deflect blame, accusing the chief of fabricating evidence and using his position to bully her. Her allies clapped and cheered, but many others looked skeptical. The cracks in her story were starting to show. What happened next surprised everyone, including the chief. As the meeting continued, several neighbors stood up to share their own experiences with the HOA. One woman talked about receiving threatening letters for planting flowers that didn't match the approved color palette. Another man described how he was fined for leaving his trash cans out overnight, a rule he claimed he'd never been told about. Even longtime supporters of the HOA began questioning whether they'd been too quick to trust its leadership. I've lived here for 15 years, an older gentleman said. his voice trembling with emotion. "And I've always followed the rules, but this isn't right. We're supposed to be a community, not a dictatorship." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, the HOA president looked genuinely rattled. Her carefully constructed image of authority and control was crumbling before her eyes. After the meeting, the chief handed over all the evidence to the district attorney. Charges were quickly filed against the HOA president and the fake officers for impersonating law enforcement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and harassment. The case made headlines, drawing attention from local news outlets and sparking debates about the role of HOAs in modern neighborhoods. Despite the mounting pressure, the HOA president refused to back down. She hired a high-profile lawyer and vowed to fight the charges in court. "This is nothing more than a personal vendetta," she declared in interviews. "He's using his badge to settle a grudge." Her words struck a nerve with some people, but most saw through the deflection. The chief had done everything by the book, presenting undeniable proof of wrongdoing. There was no vendetta, just a man standing up for himself and his community. As the trial loomed closer, the chief found himself reflecting on the journey so far. It hadn't been easy. There were moments when he doubted himself, wondering if pursuing this fight was worth the toll it was taking on his family and his peace of mind. But then he'd remember why he became a police officer in the first place: to protect people and ensure fairness for everyone, regardless of who they were or where they came from. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, his teenage son joined him. "Dad," the boy said hesitantly, "do you think we'll ever have normal days again?" The chief smiled faintly. "Probably not anytime soon. But sometimes normal isn't what we need. Sometimes we need to stand up and make things better even. If it's hard?" His son nodded slowly, staring off into the distance. "You're pretty brave, you know that?" "Not brave," the chief corrected gently. "Just stubborn. And maybe a little tired of letting people push us around." They sat there in silence for a while, father and son side by side, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. For now, the fight wasn't over. But the chief felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter what happened next, he knew he was doing the right thing for his family, for his neighbors, and for the kind of world he wanted to leave behind. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. People from all over the neighborhood had shown up, eager to see how this bizarre saga would unfold. Some came out of curiosity, others out of concern for their community, and a few simply to support the chief or the HOA president. The atmosphere was tense, like the calm before a storm. Reporters lined the back of the room, notebooks in hand, ready to capture every twist and turn. As the judge entered and took his seat, the room fell silent. The chief sat at one side of the courtroom, flanked by his lawyer, a seasoned attorney, known for taking on tough cases. Across the aisle, the HOA president sat with her high-profile defense team, looking as composed as she could manage under the circumstances. Despite her confident exterior, though, it was clear she was nervous. Her hands gripped the edge of the table tightly, betraying her anxiety. Opening statements. The prosecution went first, laying out their case in stark terms. They painted a picture of abuse of power, intimidation, and outright lawbreaking. "This isn't just about one man being harassed," the prosecutor said, pacing slowly in front of the jury. "It's about holding people accountable when they misuse authority for personal gain. The defendant orchestrated a campaign of fear against a respected member of our community, and that cannot stand." When it was the defense's turn, they struck a different tone. The lead attorney stood up, smoothing his suit jacket before addressing the court. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "what you're seeing here is not justice, it's retaliation. My client has been targeted because she dared to enforce rules designed to maintain order in this neighborhood. The chief used his position to intimidate her and smear her reputation. The chief listened intently, keeping his emotions in check. He knew this was going to be a battle of narratives, and both sides were determined to win. Testimonies that shook the courtroom. The prosecution called several key witnesses to testify. First up was the neighbor whose security camera had captured footage of the fake officers outside the chief's home. She described how she'd noticed suspicious activity and immediately handed over the recordings without hesitation. "I just wanted to help," she said softly. "No one should have to deal with something like this." Next came the former employee of the private security firm. Nervously adjusting his tie, he recounted the conversations he'd had with the HOA president and her increasingly extreme demands. When asked if he believed she intended to impersonate police officers, he nodded firmly. "Yes," he said. "She made it very clear what she wanted us to do." The defense tried to poke holes in these testimonies, questioning motives and casting doubt on the reliability of the evidence. But the stories held strong, bolstered by the emails and audio recordings presented earlier. Then came the chief himself. As he took the stand, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. For someone who spent his life enforcing the law, testifying felt strange, almost surreal. Still, he remained composed, answering questions directly and honestly. "Did you feel threatened?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," the chief replied. "Not just because of the fake officers, but because of what it represented. If someone can send imposters to my door, what does that say about safety in our community?" His words resonated with many in the room. Even some of the jurors nodded subtly, clearly moved by his testimony. The defense strikes back. The defense team wasn't about to let the prosecution run away with the case. They called their own witnesses, including loyal HOA members who praised the president for her dedication to maintaining standards in the neighborhood. One woman even claimed the chief had been difficult to work with, citing past disagreements over minor infractions like parking violations. But the most dramatic moment came when the HOA president herself took the stand. Dressed impeccably and speaking with practiced confidence, she denied any wrongdoing. "I never authorized anyone to impersonate law enforcement," she insisted. "These accusations are baseless and malicious." Her performance might have swayed some people if not for the cross-examination. The prosecutor zeroed in on inconsistencies in her story, pointing out discrepancies between her testimony and the evidence. At one point, he held up a printed email showing her explicit instructions to the security firm. "You sent this message, did you not?" he asked sharply. She hesitated, then stammered, "Well, yes, but I didn't mean for them to break the law." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. It was a pivotal moment, one that likely sealed her fate. Closing arguments. By the time closing arguments rolled around, tensions were running high. The prosecution delivered a powerful final statement, reminding the jury of the core issue: accountability. "This case isn't about gardening rules or noise complaints," the prosecutor said. "It's about protecting our community from those who think they're above the law. If we allow this behavior to go unpunished, what message does that send?" The defense countered with a fiery rebuttal, accusing the chief of using his badge to bully an innocent woman. But their arguments lacked conviction, especially after the damning evidence had been laid bare. The verdict. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their decision. The foreman stood, clearing his throat before reading the verdict aloud: "Guilty on all counts." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. The HOA president slumped in her chair, visibly shaken. Meanwhile, the chief exhaled deeply, feeling a mix of relief and vindication wash over him. Justice had been served, but the fight wasn't entirely over yet. Reflections after the trial and the days following the verdict, the neighborhood buzzed with talk of the trial. Many residents expressed gratitude for the chief's courage in standing up to the HOA president. Others admitted they'd underestimated the extent of her control and were glad to see change on the horizon. The victory was bittersweet. While he was happy to see accountability prevail, he couldn't shake the feeling that this ordeal highlighted deeper issues within the system. How many other communities were dealing with similar problems but lacked the resources or determination to fight back? One evening, as he walked through the neighborhood with his wife, he noticed something different. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now waved warmly. Kids played freely in the streets, laughing without a care in the world. It was a small shift, but it meant everything. "This feels like a fresh start," his wife said, smiling. "It does," the chief agreed, "but we've got a long way to go." And with that, they continued their walk, side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The trial may have ended, but the ripple effects of the verdict were just beginning to unfold. The guilty verdict against the HOA president sent shockwaves through the neighborhood and beyond. It wasn't just a win for one man. It was a wake-up call for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of authority. People started asking questions. How could something like this happen? Could it happen again? And what could they do to prevent it? Rebuilding trust in the weeks following the trial, the chief found himself at the center of a whirlwind of change. Neighbors approached him everywhere while walking their dogs, at the grocery store, even in passing on the street to thank him for standing up not just for himself, but for all of them. Some admitted they'd been too afraid to speak out before, fearing retaliation or ostracism. Others confessed they hadn't realized how far the HOA's control extended until now. Always thought the rules were annoying but harmless. One elderly neighbor told him over coffee, "Now I see how dangerous unchecked power can be." These conversations inspired the chief to take action. He knew that simply removing one bad actor wasn't enough. If the neighborhood truly wanted to move forward, they needed to address the root causes of the problem and rebuild trust within the community. So he started organizing informal meetings with residents, inviting anyone interested to share their thoughts and ideas. At first, turnout was modest. A handful of curious neighbors showed up, unsure of what to expect. But as word spread about these gatherings, more people began attending, some eager to contribute, others just wanting to listen. What emerged from these discussions was a shared desire for transparency, fairness, and collaboration. Changing the system. One of the biggest challenges facing the neighborhood was reforming the HOA itself. With the previous president removed from her position and banned from holding leadership roles due to the court's ruling, there was an opportunity to reshape the organization into something better. The chief worked closely with a group of volunteers to draft new guidelines aimed at preventing future abuses of power. They proposed several key changes. 1. Transparent decision-making. All major decisions would require approval from a majority vote of homeowners, rather than being dictated by a single individual. 2. Clear boundaries on enforcement. Rules would focus on safety and practicality, avoiding unnecessary restrictions like color-coded curtains or rigid landscaping requirements. 3. Regular audits. An independent committee would review HOA activities annually to ensure compliance with ethical standards. 4. Community involvement. Residents would have more opportunities to participate in meetings and voice concerns without fear of retribution. These reforms weren't perfect, and implementing them wouldn't be easy. But they represented a step in the right direction, a chance to create a system that served everyone fairly. A new leadership team with the old guard dismantled. It was time to elect a new HOA board. This process became a defining moment for the neighborhood. For years, leadership positions had been dominated by a small clique of influential figures who prioritized strict rule enforcement over community well-being. Now, ordinary residents stepped forward to take on these roles, bringing fresh perspectives and a genuine commitment to collaboration. Among those elected was a retired teacher known for her kindness and patience, a young father passionate about sustainability, and a tech-savvy professional eager to modernize communication between neighbors. Together, they formed a diverse team united by a common goal, fostering a sense of belonging and mutual respect. Their first order of business? Hosting a community cleanup day. It might sound simple, but the event brought people together in ways no one expected. Families worked side by side clearing trash from parks, planting trees along sidewalks, and painting murals on drab walls. Laughter filled the air as kids chased each other around, while adults exchanged stories and forged connections they'd never had before. For the chief, watching this transformation unfold was deeply rewarding. It reminded him why he'd fought so hard, not for revenge or recognition, but for the chance to build something stronger and more resilient. Lessons learned as life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of it. The chief took time to reflect on everything that had happened. He realized that this ordeal had taught him valuable lessons about resilience, humility, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. He also learned that fighting for justice isn't a solo endeavor. Along the way, he'd leaned on his family, colleagues, and neighbors for support. Without their encouragement, he might not have had the strength to keep going. That realization reinforced his belief in the power of community, a network of individuals working together toward a common purpose. His teenage son summed it up perfectly during one of their late-night talks. "Dad, you didn't just beat the HOA," he said. "You showed us that we're stronger when we stick together." The chief smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's exactly right. None of us are invincible, but together, we can handle anything." Looking ahead, though the immediate crisis had passed, the chief knew the work wasn't done. Change takes time, and maintaining momentum would require ongoing effort. To help ensure accountability, he partnered with local lawmakers to introduce legislation regulating HOAs across the region. The bill aimed to establish clear guidelines for governance, limit penalties for minor infractions, and provide legal recourse for residents targeted unfairly. It wasn't an easy road. Lobbyists representing powerful HOAs pushed back fiercely, arguing that stricter regulations would hinder their ability to maintain property values. But the chief stood firm, drawing on his experience to advocate for balance and fairness. Slowly, but surely, the tide began to shift as more people rallied behind the cause. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to thrive under its new leadership. Monthly potluck dinners replaced formal HOA meetings, creating spaces where neighbors could connect over food and laughter. Kids organized pickup basketball games in driveways, while adults collaborated on projects like community gardens and book clubs. The once divided streets now buzzed with camaraderie and shared purpose. A quiet evening on a crisp autumn evening, the chief sat on his porch, sipping tea and watching leaves swirl in the breeze. His wife joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she settled into the chair beside him. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of cicadas and the occasional bark of a dog down the block. "You know," she said softly, "I think we finally have the neighborhood we've always dreamed of." He nodded, gazing out at the peaceful scene. Yeah, took a lot of work, but it was worth it. She reached over, squeezing his hand, and you led the way. I'm proud of you. The chief chuckled, shaking his head. Not just me. Everyone pitched in. That's what made it happen. As they sat there together, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, the chief felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was good. Better than good, actually. It was hopeful. And sometimes, hope is the greatest victory of all.